Teachers of Reddit, what was the worst thing you had to confiscate from a student? So this was less confiscated and more this student ended up just leaving this in my room and we had to throw it away, but it was certainly weird and is among my favorite things. I have a student this year who has brought some interesting things in. He's in 7th grade and this is usually beyond the age students play show and tell to begin with. Things included a Russian nesting doll of household items, lunch boxes, crayon bags, a plastic egg and many things in between. 8 or 9 total, leading to a paper with Joe Biden written on it, and a jar of other people's hair. He was asking his teachers to add to it. This somehow beats both. Over the course of what feels like a week, this student had been collecting cherry tomatoes at lunch and saving them. Eventually, he had a handful of them. He named each one. He drew a face of each. He had created a family of tomatoes. He even began dressing them in tape-created safety seats. Only the children tomatoes though. He even had a French fry boat for a vehicle to carry his tomato family to each class. Eventually he left it in our class over weekend and the tomatoes went bad. We had to toss them. He asked us not to call TPS on him. Tomato Protective Services. I love this kid. I love this. My kids had a cantaloupe that they named Jeffrey and brought camping with us. I'm so glad it was just the one SND, not a whole cantaloupe family. Over the course of years, bottle of vodka hidden in the girls' bathroom by 7th graders. How did you know where to look? Everyone who came back from the bathroom was drunk, so you're not as sneaky as you think. Vape, my mom gave it to me for allergies, so I'll just give it back to her then. Wide eyes. No. Student banging the primers of 23006 shells together in class. Grab. I just wanted to see if they would go off. I love stories like those first two where the kid just doesn't have the life experience needed to understand how obvious the lie is or how quickly we can figure out if it is a lie. Like a toddler swearing he didn't steal any chocolate while it smeared all over his face. Napalm. Some kids were into petrol gas sniffing but found it hard to transport and keep hidden, so they learned how to make napalm so they could carry it hidden in their bags. I had to lock down the whole school and get hazmat in to dispose of it. And how did they find out how to make it? They asked one of the science teachers and he told them. A crossbow, property of a 17-year-old student at the boarding school where I used to work. The same boy was also fond of bringing pheasants to school that he'd killed on his father's estate and plucking them in the shower block. Not necessarily the craziest thing to confiscate, but the effect that confiscating the item had on the student was pretty upsetting. For background, I am an elementary special education teacher for students with emotional disabilities and intense behaviors. These students have behaviors that range from yelling, throwing things, and leaving the classroom to students who have attempted suicide and students who have assaulted their peers or the school staff. I even had a student go for a cop's gun one time. The student in question was in 1st grade at the time and fairly low key compared to some of the other kids I had. This student and I had a good relationship as I was one of the only male staff in the building. He lacked a reliable male figure in his life, and for the majority of his kindergarten year, I was the primary teacher working with him. One day my student had asked to use the restroom, and for most of my students, our staff will escort them to and from the restroom. So I went with him. Now it's been several years so the details are fuzzy, but somehow it was brought to my attention that there was burnt toilet paper in the boys' restroom. I can't remember if my student or another student told me, but I want to say it was my own student. This sets off some alarms in my head, so I contact my admin team so they're aware. As we're going forward with our day, I notice that my student is fidgety and messing with something in their jacket pocket. So I ask them if I can check their pocket, and instead of saying yes, he pulls out a little Bic lighter and tells me that he found it and asks me to keep it a secret. Of course I can't just turn a blind eye, so I report it to my admin team and we sit down with the student to talk about fire safety. We explained how playing with lighters isn't safe and that he could hurt himself or others if he accidentally started a fire that got out of control. My student feels awful. He's apologizing and feeling remorseful. He admits to us that he had been messing around with lighters at home when his mom was sleeping. We contacted his mother to tell her what had happened and what he had told us, and her response was unfortunate. She was furious with us. told us there was no way that he had brought a lighter, and that it must have been planted by a peer, that we coerced a confession out of him and that she was pulling him out of school immediately. Within a year the family's house burned down, and my former student was severely burned in the fire. I work in the school system as well and we have a class just like you described. My office, IT, is next to it and I have had to help on occasion. One thing that gets me about these kids is not that they struggle with these behavior issues, it's that they have crap parents that don't care or listen to the teacher about what can be done better. My wife is a teacher and one of her first graders brought her 2 hard seltzers because her mom said they're good after a long day and she deserved them. Not a teacher, but I'm half deaf and my music teacher took my hearing aid and refused to accept that it wasn't an earbud. Then he yelled at me for the rest of the class for not playing in tune. Couldn't exactly tell how well I was playing since I could hear it. My friend is diabetic and has an insulin pump. They had multiple teachers over the years think it's an MP3 player and try to confiscate it before realizing it's attached to their body and they literally can't hand it over. My mum has been a primary teacher for her whole life now, in the UK, and the worst incident she had to deal with was with a girl aged 10 who was having issues with a boy essentially bullying her. She told her dad, and her dad's solution was to give her a sawn-off shotgun to intimidate the boy. No one knew it was unloaded, but the heck it raised when a 10-year-old schoolgirl brings out a shotgun certainly put the boy off from ever coming near her again. I'm sorry, but the image of a little 10-year-old holding what is probably a 12-gauge sawed-off shotgun is hilarious to me. Probably was a quarter the size of her and would send her half a kilometer in the other direction if she tried to use it. Thank God it was unloaded though. That would have been a very, very traumatizing day for everyone involved. A gorilla mask. Yes. Dude put it on while my back was turned and facing the board. I laughed like heck then took it for the day until his parents collected it. Preschool teacher here. I had to convince a 4-year-old that his mom's wedding ring should go into a special box on the front desk instead of on the finger of a 6-year-old girl he had a crush on. Later he brought in his dad's car keys and a bottle opener. I think I have heard things like this before. The kid actually gave the ring to the girl, who kept it, and when the boy's mother found out, she asked the other parents to return it and they refused, saying it was a gift. Penis-shaped glass pipe with weed still in the balls bowl. Mom asked if she would be getting it back or if the school was keeping it. My mom always told the story about my brother bringing a signed picture of Richard Petty to his class and telling everyone he was his dad. 1 second grade maybe, but that everyone forgot because the next kids pulled out an antique gun. I had a similar experience but it was with a grenade. Still had the pin it in and the whole school was evacuated. When I was in 5th grade there was an active market in live bees. Some kids figured out that the weight of the average 5th grader briefly stepping on a bee in the grass would stun it for about a minute without actually killing it. They started going out in teams to scout bees on the field, stun them, and carefully scoop them into plastic sandwich bags. They'd then sell them to other students who'd release them in classrooms to waste class time and scare people. You could get honeybees for 25 cents a piece. Bumblebees and yellow jackets cost more. Teachers and school admin started cracking down on this. Teachers literally confiscated live bees in plastic bags from students when found, and they eventually had to start having someone watch the field to catch students in the act. Gimme 5 bees for a quarter, you'd say. Not mine, but my fiance's co-worker confiscated a makeshift shank from a 3rd grader, roughly 8 years old, made from a popsicle stick and a straw. He said he was going to use it on his animals at home. Best part was when they told the dad, he said, "Why did you give him supplies to make a shank? I assume he's gonna kill a few people in the future." I made shanks out of every popsicle stick I ever got. I came from a very mild-mannered household, but I think I watched Conan one too many times or something. I was a weird little girl. Not a teacher, but I watched quite a funny confiscation while in detention as a sophomore in high school. I was reading a book just trying to make the time go by when our vice principal, who was monitoring detention that day, stepped out for a moment. All of a sudden I hear a cracking sound and I look up from my book to see a broken egg on the floor. The few kids in the room look around at each other confused. Nobody owns up to it, and nobody knows who did it because we were all distracted when it happened. The vice principal returns, doesn't notice the egg, but he's so engrossed in his paperwork that this kid still gets away with throwing another egg. Everyone looks up. The VP asked what that noise was, and this kid holds up a broken pencil and apologizes. Everyone goes back to minding their business, but all the students now know who the culprit is. Finally, this kid throws one last egg, but unfortunately the VP looked up from his papers right as he threw it. He walked over to the kid's desk, asked him what he thought he was doing, and the kid goes just cracking jokes. VP holds out his hand and the kid reveals an entire carton of eggs from under his sweatshirt and hands it to him. VP looked so unfazed that I honestly wondered what else that man has seen. I was honestly glad I got detention that day. VPs probably have seen some weird butt crap in their days considering they've worked long enough to become a VP. I taught first grade and confiscated a piece of a broken beer bottle from a 6-year-old. It really surprised me, because he was the sweetest kid. Turns out another classmate asked him to bring a weapon and hide it in the playground sand, so that he could get back at another kid. I tried to do more life lesson things than suspension for both boys. BC they're freaking 6, but school policy had them both suspended for a few days. In 3rd grade, I once had my entire deck of only holographic UGR cards confiscated from me for playing with them during break time too much with friends. I was told I'd be able to get them back when I graduated school. 6th grade. I said okay, not totally understanding what was going on. I forgot about them completely, though I still kept a vested interest in the TCG for a few more years, like into 5th grade, until 9th grade. I went back and asked my old 3rd grade teacher to return my property. Within seconds, she pulls them out of her desk drawer and hands me them. It was an odd experience. Knowing a few teachers, I wouldn't be surprised if she had been waiting for you to come back for them. Worst thing, bullets. From a 1st grader. Had to do a room clear to look for a gun. Best thing, a cat a high school student brought in their backpack. Haha. My mother's younger cat was a stray kitten backpacked in by a 1st grader. Know a teacher, she and her 1st or 2nd grade class, can't remember which, were on lunch. Lunch lady walks up and tells her one of her students just tried to buy an extra something with over $1,000 in cash she had stuffed in a tiny coin pouch that looked like a plushy pink duck. Teacher called the girl's house and the mom was 9.8 into a full-blown 10/10 panic after looking for it all morning. This was the early 2000s when it was still normal to pay bills in cash, in person. Apparently they forgot to give the girl her allowance, 50 cents, so she took the paper money instead. Pizza and chocolate milk, $900 please. So far, a death letter that a severely antisocial social student wrote after a minor incident with a peer. The letter told the student to kill themselves, to die already, etc., and depicted bloody, slashed wrists. I truly think the student didn't intend to give the other student the letter because they never talked to anyone, but that was some fricked up crap to see from a kid. This sounds like a severely depressed child with no way to cope who needs serious help. I would bet this isn't an isolated incident and that a lot of things are being overlooked. I hope they get help before something happens. The weirdest one was definitely the fish in a vase they found during locker checks. It was in an unassigned locker someone had added a lock to. Inside was a live betta fish in about as large a vase as you can fit in a locker, fully decorated. Someone had clipped a little book light to the top of the vase, presumably so fish wasn't in the dark all the time. No one claimed to know whose it was or how long it had been there, so it lived in the coach's office for at least that year. Not a teacher, but a bus driver. I had to confiscate a 5th grader's cell phone a few days ago, specifically because he was showing hardcore P to 1st graders with it. Lots of phone calls that day. I know of an opposite story, a school bus driver that had hardcore P mags stashed in the bus. Most dangerous, a knife from an 8th grader. Most annoying, different school than above, but a Wi-Fi jammer and a USB killing device from an 8th grader. Again, the other way round. When I was about 10 I wrote a report on beer. I had written to lots of breweries to ask for beer labels and basically described each brewery a little bit. One of the brewery's beers was Forbidden, named after the forbidden fruit. It had a picture of Adam and Eve on it. Well, Eve was quite interesting to all the boys, as you can imagine. Had that label confiscated. I also failed that report. Why did you fail it? It sounds like you put a ton of effort into it. Not a teacher, but I once brought one of those joke pens to school that shock you when you press the button, and a teacher took it and got shocked. They were not amused. Not a teacher, but this is the worst thing I had confiscated. It was 1984 and I was 9 years old. Back then it was common for parents to buy loads of fireworks for November 5th in Britain. Guy Fawkes Night. I got a load of them on around November 1st and emptied them into a cardboard toilet roll that I'd sealed up at one end. Made a fuse from blowtorch paper and stuck it in, then used masking tape to seal the top. I was 9 years old. I took it to school and was showing a kid in class during a lesson. The teacher, a guy in his 60s, saw I was distracting people, so called me up and asked what it was. I explained and he confiscated it. At the end of the day, he called me over, told me not to bring things like that into school, and then gave IT back to ME. And that was the end of the matter, until I set it off a few days later and it set fire to a hedge. Kids, the 80s really were a different time. Literally 1984. Not a teacher, but my 7th grade homeroom teacher confiscated my private journal and read it. There's nothing more disappointing than losing respect for elders as a child. My 6th grade teacher forced us to journal and assured us that she would never read it. I was mad at her one day and blew off steam in the journal, and got called in during recess because she read it and was crying. Not my proudest moment, but I was furious that she didn't keep her promise. Obligatory. Not a teacher. I work with kids who have special needs. One of my kids brought in a ball gag and several of the largest butt plugs I have ever seen. I work, Ed, as a middle school language teacher. Every kid in class is assigned a Chromebook and we are encouraged to have the kids work on them. I let them sit together to encourage them to help each other out while they do some work on their devices. I see 2 kids at the back of the class, giggling and just watching the screen. No reading or writing happening. I get up slowly, watch them panic and start frantically clicking the mouse so as to close up the windows that weren't supposed to be open. I get to them and ask them what's funny. One of the kids says something about emails as I take the Chromebook from his desk. The only open tab is in fact the email. I sit down at a free desk close to his and use a trick I had just learned, which was to reopen tabs that had been recently closed. 1, twice, 3rd time's the charm. Full on PNV pornographic video on screen. They found a way to bypass the school board security and were watching P in class. So I guess the confiscation of a Chromebook isn't exactly the worst as opposed to what was on the Chromebook. Not sure if malicus.com still works. Sketch site. Don't go there on your home computer. But that was the crap back in the day. LMAO. One time someone tried to snitch but the teacher spelt malicious not malicus. I didn't confiscate anything, but this is a good story nonetheless. One of my high school students, grade 10, so about 16 years old, walked into class and threw his school bag down on the ground beside his desk. About 20 minutes later, as I'm teaching, I smell beer. I called the student who threw his bag down on the ground over to my desk and took him outside into the hall. He told me he has a 6-pack of beer in his bag for a party after school and it broke when he threw his bag down. I told him to go and remove his bag and clean up the mess with paper towel. I didn't involve admin, call his parents, and the students didn't notice. He got rid of his bag, cleaned up the mess quietly and calmly, and we moved on with our day like nothing happened. Sometimes kids just make bad mistakes and I could tell this kid was terrified about the consequences. Not a teacher, but my neighbor was a teacher and we chat regularly, and I asked a very similar question to this. Worst thing, a knife from a girl in 7th grade. She was being bullied and planned on stabbing several other girls in class. Weirdest, a gumball the size of a melon. As in, a huge clump of chewed gum some boy in the 9th grade had been adding to for about a year and kept secret in his locker. Turns out it was a personal project of his and explained why he was constantly chewing gum. All day, every day. Never confiscated anything, but when I worked as a kindergarten teacher in China, I'd see kids, 4, 5 and 6 years old, come in with the wildest shirts and hats. Those ones you see that say things like, I smoke cracker FCK beaches, I'm not gay but $20 is $20, etc. Yeah, I saw a post about Asian countries having super inappropriate English clothing trending. Good to know they weren't messing around. My dad told me we once had to restrain a student and confiscate a pencil sharpener, one of the cheap plastic ones, which he had done a decent job of sharpening his pinky with. My dad has a master's in English and special education. He works with special needs at risk kids and has had to take knives and all sorts of stuff from his kids. I just want to give him credit because he deserves it. It's hard, thankless, and no one wants to do it. You know, as a kid I always wondered if the pencil sharpener could do that, but I wasn't stupid enough to try. Now about 15 years later, my question has been answered. Not a teacher, but in 7th grade I got caught with a knife. Didn't realize that I had it until I was on the bus. I'd worn this pair of jeans to walk to my buddy's house up the road on Sunday and had my little pocket knife in my pocket. I have an uncle who has always been a whittler carver and makes really impressive stuff. I'd gotten a small knife and was trying to learn also. Anyway, Monday morning I got up and just threw those same jeans on and hurried to the bus stop. Realized my pocket knife was still in my pocket about halfway to school. In second period, gym, I told my buddy that I'd accidentally brought my pocket knife to school and didn't know what to do with it. He thought I was bullshitting him, so he yelled to the coach that I said I had a knife. She patted me down and found it. Straight to jail. Had to wait there for my parents to come pick me up. Got kicked out of school for a month. Didn't have to do any schoolwork during that time, and missing a month of assignments and homework didn't count against me. But the boredom of staying home alone every day watching The Price is Right and soap operas was torture. I hope that guy wasn't your buddy for much longer after that. A styrofoam head that some boys had drawn a smile on and scooped out some eye holes. It had a name and they took it to every class. It got old and shabby and so did the joke, so I put it out of its misery. Great staff room trophy though. Not a teacher, but as a student I had my antidepressants and meds confiscated cause they were doing bag checks. I never got them back and as my parents had to get me a refill. Confiscated again until my parents told the principal. Jesus Christ. Those are controlled substances and likely not easy to get refilled. Although most schools want them kept at the office, so if that's why they took them I get it. But still crappy if you were of an age to take them yourself. In high school before the internet I had a locker full of P-mags that I would rent out to kids for $1 a night. I didn't know they cut locks off lockers and emptied them over the holidays. I so had some tiger claws and nunchucks confiscated. I hope you didn't touch those magazines with your bare hands. Not a teacher. My friend teaches in middle school though, and she once said that a student bought in his dad's fleshlight. I guess his friends stole it after he showed it to them, which is gross. Anyway, he needed help getting it back or some such nonsense. A girl my first year was trying to learn the dragon language from Skyrim. She had a whole paper full of shouts. I wasn't even mad, just curious. LOL. My mom has had stories about what she's confiscated from lower elementary age students, K3. The usual prank items like woolly cushions, sure. But one time a student was playing with this weird box. The box was locked, so she couldn't put it in the confiscated bin. She put it on top of a cabinet. About an hour later, it starts ringing. Furiously, it took some doing to get the box open. Turns out, this kid's parent was a professional chef. So the kid had grabbed every timer in the house, set them for the max amount of time, locked the box, brought it to school, and played with it so it would get confiscated and ring loudly. Whole class erupted with laughter and screaming. A true agent of chaos. This is like professional level fuckery. After school care here, had a little boy try to give what I'd clock as a $700,200,000 diamond ring to a girl he had a crush on. I'm no jeweler, but the rocks in the ring are massive and very real looking, and the mom sobbed when she got it back. I know someone whose grandson, in kindergarten or first grade, took his mom's engagement ring and gave it to a little girl in his class. Luckily the teacher saw it and called his parents. A phone full of videos of people eating live animals, puppies, kittens, etc. Massive safeguarding case. He got the help he needed. My stepdad has been an administrator at a middle school for years. Once he had a pretty notorious student come into the office looking for a scooter that had been abandoned confiscated. He saw it, swore to high heaven it was his. Nobody believed him on reputation. They pulled out the little removable handlebars and found a bag of weed stashed inside. See? That's mine. So I'm not a teacher, but Halo. I was in high school and someone or a rock band of someone's had figured out a way to load a Halo emulator onto the school-wide network drive. Obviously, the higher-ups of the school didn't like this one bit and took it down. This began a war that ultimately was won by whomever loved Halo enough to share it with the world. It went weeks of back and forth and the IT department was so annoyed with it that we came back from summer break and they had completely revamped the school's network. There was a supposed file locker that only the highest of highs could make changes and it was there where the beloved folder lay to support Halo. I'm not tech savvy, so I don't understand, but somehow this was also touted as a way for the entire school district to have easy access to materials. This meant, of course, it was only a matter of time until the Halo popped up in the super secret, private folder and it was playable again. For reference, my district at the time of going to high school back in 2015 had like 12 high schools. Absolutely massive. In the end, the IT department for the district waved the white flag and I think Halo is still on the district network. My school has Halo, Doom and COD zombies in the school-wide drive. The art department also uploads a bunch of illegally downloaded movies. It's kinda funny tbh. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.